はい、皆様ごきげんよう。 J 州インサイトのお時間です。今日はですね、オーストラリアで非常に大人気を博しました元首相のアボットさんをお迎えしまして、 J 州インサイト特別編を相葉とそれから山岡先生のコラボでお届けしたいと考えております。私の今回司会を中心でさせていただきまして、山岡先生に質問者としてですね、アボットさんにいろいろ伺ってみたいと思っております。ではアボットさん、今日はお忙しい中ありがとうございます。では今から山岡の方から中心に質問をいろいろさせていただきます。
Mr. Abbott, once again, thank you very much for joining us today. Very honored to see you. How is Japan?
Look, it's always good to be in Japan. I was sorry to be there for such a sad business, but on the other hand, I was pleased to be able to give suitable honour to the late Abe Shinzo, who was a great friend of Australia, and he was also a great friend to me personally. So I was pleased to be able to be there as part of a large Australian delegation. We had our Prime Minister, Mr Albanese, we had Mr Howard, we had Mr Turnbull, as well as myself. So we had 4 Prime Ministers from Australia,
That's great.
which was, I think, a pretty good way for Australia to honour someone who wasn't just a great friend of Australia and not just the longest serving post-war Japanese Prime Minister, but was a statesman of global consequence.
Yeah, that was very impressive. The present Prime Minister and 3 other former Prime Ministers, including yourself. That was very, very impressive, and we're very pleased to see that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Now, please let me ask you some questions to start with. In your eye, how is Australia doing overall in terms of recovering from COVID and other international turbulence?
Well, these are very challenging times. Economically and strategically, they are probably the most testing times we've had for many decades. COVID obviously brought on a whole lot of global supply chain shocks. China's increasing belligerence, the Beijing regime's increasing belligerence has also resulted in some supply chain shocks and indeed some disruptions to trade, particularly Australian trade. So there's a lot that needs to be done, and I worry that some of the trends in our politics are actually counterproductive, particularly given the economic turbulence we face. For instance, the new government has entrenched a 43% emissions reduction target in legislation, and that's going to add to cost of living pressure at a time when we already have significant inflationary pressure. So I think these are difficult times, and I worry that, at least for the moment, in some areas at least, we're going down the wrong path. Now, I should also say that the Albanese government, to its credit, has pretty much continued the former Morrison government's stance on strategic issues. The Albanese government is every bit as enthusiastically in support of the Quad, of which Abe Shinzo was the founder, the father. The Albanese government has been suitably strong against the Beijing regime's bullying, and has been very active to try to ensure that China's push into the Pacific is suitably countered by democracies such as Australia.
Australia is supposed to be the most self-sufficient country, isn't it? And then we expect Australia to be the most resilient under such difficult times.
Well, one of the things that I used to say when I was Prime Minister is that Australia can be a source of energy, resource and food security to other countries. We certainly can be all those things. The paradox is that we are a country with superabundant reserves of coal and of gas and of uranium but we're making increasingly little use of those self-same resources here in this country. And in fact, we make no use domestically, or almost no use domestically, of our uranium. And if we are serious about getting to net zero anytime soon, the only way to do that while keeping the lights on is to move to nuclear power.
Okay. Well, it sounds like a bit of the complex or paradox you have. From myself again, this is going to be a little bit serious questions. If China attacks Taiwan, do you think the U.S. will come to defend Taiwan, as Joe Biden repeatedly stated?
Look, that's the $64 question, isn't it? It's interesting that 4 times now, President Biden has been quite emphatic that the United States would defend Taiwan in the event of an unprovoked attack across the Straits. Each time, officials have been at pains to say that the policy of strategic ambiguity has not changed. My own suspicion is that the President, quite cleverly perhaps, while keeping the policy, has changed what the policy means. It's also interesting that senior people in Japan have been much more forthright in their statements about Taiwan. In fact, one of Abe-san's recent speeches, I think he said a Taiwan contingency would be a Japan contingency and therefore an American contingency. There's absolutely no doubt that if Japan came to Taiwan's assistance, that would almost certainly involve the Americans, given the much closer alliance relationship between America and Japan than there currently is between America and Taiwan. So look, I think it's very important that the democracies raise the cost to China of any aggression across the Straits. And let's face it, if it's 1.4 billion Chinese against 23 million Taiwanese, that's a pretty unequal struggle. But if it is China against a democratic coalition, that's a different thing altogether. And in the end, if you are dealing with a potential bully, you've got to show strength. That's the only way to deal with a potential bully. If Putin had been aware of just how much help the Western democracies would give to Ukraine, I doubt he would have begun his invasion. And certainly if there had been Western troops in Ukraine, as there are in the Baltic states, Poland and other NATO members, there's no doubt whatsoever that aggression would have been deterred.
Okay, well, I hope Biden is cleverly behaving. I just hope. Okay, now the next one. But what do you think Australia will do if the US does not actually come to help Taiwan? Will that can happen?
Well, that's a very good question as well. I imagine that Australia will act as a very close ally of the United States. If America were involved, I think it's almost inevitable that Australia is involved. I wouldn't want to speculate otherwise.
Yeah, I know this is a very difficult question because the stance of both Japan and Australia very similar. Those countries are in the position to help the United States. So that means the assumption is the US is there. Yeah.
On the other hand, I mean, Japan is part of the first island chain. Taiwan is part of the first island chain.
That's right.
And if Taiwan were under the sway of an unfriendly power, that would obviously be very important for Japan.
Yes.
Very significant for Japan.
Yes.
So